Right now, in early 2026, the Central Bank of Iraq made a decision that's got dinar investors buzzing all over the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. But here's the twist. Most people are reading it completely wrong. And if you've been holding dinar hoping for a massive overnight jump, what I'm about to show you could change how you think about this investment entirely. Stick with me for the next few minutes, because we're going to break down exactly what Iraq's central bank just confirmed, what it actually means in plain English, and why understanding this correctly matters more than any prediction you've seen on social media. Welcome back to Dinar Intel Hub. If you're new here, this channel is all about giving you grounded, fact-based analysis on the Iraqi dinar. Not hype, not guesswork, just what's actually happening on the ground in Iraq and what it means for you. Today we're digging into a real, confirmed development. The Central Bank of Iraq has told the Ministry of Finance that the exchange rate baked into Iraq's 2026 federal budget will be 1,300 dinars per US dollar. That's not a rumor. That's not a leaked document from an anonymous source. That's an official communication tied to the country's budget planning process. So why does this matter, and why are so many people misreading it? Let's break it down step by step. First, let's understand what this 1,300 number actually is. In early 2026, the central bank informed the finance ministry that it would set the exchange rate at 1,300 Iraqi dinars per dollar in the federal budget. This is what's called a budget accounting rate. It's the number the government uses to plan how much revenue it expects from oil sales, which are priced in dollars, and how that translates into dinar for the national budget. Here's the important distinction. This is not a new policy, and it's not a revaluation. The central bank has used this same 1,300 rate for government accounting purposes for years now. What we're seeing is confirmation of continuity, not a dramatic shift. But there's more nuance here, and this is where a lot of dinar content online gets it wrong. Iraq actually operates what functions as a layered exchange system. The central bank buys dollars from the Ministry of Finance at 1,300, then sells dollars to local banks at a slightly higher rate around 1,310, and banks in turn sell to the public and for import transactions at around 1,320. This tiered structure exists to keep the banking system liquid while maintaining the core peg. Now, why does a peg matter? A currency peg means Iraq's central bank is actively managing the dinar's value against the dollar rather than letting market forces determine it freely. The IMF has confirmed that Iraq's exchange rate system is best described as a conventional peg, with an official rate around 1,320 dinars per dollar. Under a peg, sudden multifold jumps in value simply don't happen the way floating currencies sometimes move. They require a deliberate policy decision, and that decision has to be justified by the country's actual economic fundamentals. Its foreign reserves, its fiscal position, its trade balance, and its banking infrastructure. So what would it actually take for something like that to happen? Let's talk about reserves, because this is one of the most overlooked pieces of this entire story. Before we go further, I want you to remember this next number, because it's going to reshape how you think about Iraq's near-term currency outlook. It's not what most channels are telling you. According to the IMF's 2025 Article 4 report, Iraq's gross foreign reserves are projected to decline from $100.3 billion in 2024 to $91 billion in 2025, and down to $79.2 billion in 2026 under baseline assumptions. That's a meaningful drop. Foreign reserves are essentially the fuel that allows a central bank to defend its currency's value and supply dollars to the banking system. When reserves are shrinking rather than growing, it tells you the central bank has less room to maneuver, not more. A country planning a currency appreciation typically wants reserves building up, not drawing down, because appreciation requires confidence and buffers, not fiscal strain. This connects directly to something else worth understanding: the gap between the official rate and the parallel, or street, market rate. The 1,300 figure is the budget and fiscal accounting rate. It doesn't mean every individual can buy dollars at exactly that number with zero friction. In fact, new CBI requirements for supplying dollars to importers increased demand in the parallel market, and that gap actually widened in late January 2026 before easing somewhat. Why does this happen? Because Iraq has been tightening compliance requirements on how dollars move through its banking system. Starting in January 2025, international transactions have been routed through commercial banks using correspondent banking relationships, with the central bank replenishing balances and auditing for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing compliance. This is part of a broader push to modernize Iraq's financial plumbing and align it with international banking standards, something that's been a long-standing recommendation from the IMF. Here's the real story most people miss. These compliance reforms are actually more consequential for the dinar's long-term trajectory than any budget rate announcement. Why? Because a currency's real strength isn't just about the number on paper. It's about whether the banking system underneath it is trusted, transparent, and connected to the global financial system. The IMF has specifically called for Iraq to continue modernizing its banking system and support private banks in expanding their correspondent banking relationships, alongside a comprehensive restructuring of state-owned banks addressing non-performing loans and capital shortfalls, plus improvements in corporate governance and digital infrastructure. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this next part explains why so much of what you see online about a sudden dinar jump just doesn't hold up mathematically. And once you understand this, you'll be able to filter out the noise yourself. Let's talk about fiscal pressure, because this is the piece that ties everything together. Iraq's non-oil sector growth slowed sharply, from 13.8% in 2023 down to an estimated 2.5% in 2024, largely due to reduced public investment, a weaker trade balance, and financing constraints that led to a buildup of arrears. That's a country dealing with real economic headwinds, not one positioned to suddenly multiply its currency's value. The IMF has also warned that without significant reform, Iraq's fiscal deficits and external accounts are projected to deteriorate further over the medium term, especially against a backdrop of lower oil prices. Since oil exports make up the overwhelming majority of Iraq's government revenue, oil price swings and OPEC+ production decisions directly affect how much fiscal room the country has to work with. This is why the IMF's specific recommendations to Iraq focus on things like mobilizing non-oil tax revenue, reining in the public wage bill, restructuring state-owned banks, and reforming the labor market and business environment, not currency revaluation. When you look at what international institutions are actually telling Iraq to prioritize, it's structural economic reform, not a dramatic currency event. So where does that leave the "will the dinar revalue" question? Based on the actual data, a significant and sudden revaluation isn't supported by the current policy signals. If the dinar does appreciate, the more realistic path is a gradual one, tied to narrowing the gap between official and parallel exchange rates, strengthening banking channels, and maintaining adequate reserves and fiscal discipline. This is also a good moment to address something directly. There are aggressive marketing campaigns out there promising guaranteed gains, secret revaluation dates, or locked exchange programs, and U.S. authorities have documented actual fraud cases and issued consumer alerts tied to these dinar promotion schemes. If you ever see a channel or seller promising a guaranteed date or a guaranteed rate, that's a signal to be skeptical, not excited. So what should you actually be watching going forward if you're following this space seriously? First, keep an eye on whether the 1,300 budget rate holds steady or shifts in future policy communications. Consistency here signals continued stability rather than sudden change. Second, watch the gap between the official rate and the parallel market rate. A narrowing gap over time reflects growing confidence in Iraq's official banking channels. A widening gap signals continued friction in accessing dollars through legitimate means. Third, pay attention to Iraq's reserve trajectory and oil revenue trends, since these are the fundamental levers that would ultimately support or undermine any future currency adjustment, gradual or otherwise. And fourth, track the pace of Iraq's banking sector reforms, including progress on state-owned bank restructuring and expanding correspondent banking relationships. These technical, less headline-grabbing developments are actually the building blocks for any meaningful long-term change in how the dinar functions in the global financial system. The honest, grounded takeaway is this: Iraq is in a phase of gradual institutional reform, not dramatic currency transformation. That's not as exciting as a viral prediction, but it's what the actual data supports. And understanding that distinction is what separates informed observers from people chasing speculation. At the end of the day, if you're invested in or simply following the Iraqi dinar, the smartest approach is to base your understanding on verifiable economic data, budget communications, IMF reports, central bank policy, rather than unverified predictions about secret rates or imminent windfalls. Iraq's economic story right now is one of gradual reform under real fiscal pressure, shaped by oil revenue swings, banking modernization, and international financial cooperation. That's a story worth following closely, just not through the lens of overnight transformation. Thanks so much for watching this breakdown here on Dinar Intel Hub. If you found this analysis helpful, do us a favor and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage. We're here regularly with updates on Iraqi dinar developments, geopolitical shifts, economic reforms, and honest market analysis. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. We genuinely read them and often build future videos around your questions. And as always, remember this content is for educational and informational purposes only, and it's not financial advice. See you in the next one.